Hey everybody, Robin Thompson here at Powerful Practice. My job is to help mental health professionals to make more impact and more revenue with their work by serving online powerfully. And for those of you who are following me, you know that I talk a lot about online group coaching programs and how they can help you to make more impact in more people's lives, how they can help you to make more revenue, how they can help you to control your clinical hours, and help you to create a practice where you can make a bigger difference and a bigger impact in society as a whole, or to have a lifestyle where you have more of a lifestyle business, but where you're able to be there for your family, but you're also able to support yourself with what you need financially and feel like you're making a contribution in the world. And for me, I love the online group coaching program model for that. One question that I get a lot is about ethics and about legal considerations of adding a coaching program to your practice. And so I have asked a legal expert, Bruce Hillowe. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Bruce Hillowe, who is a New York State attorney, to join me today for a LinkedIn Live. And I wanted to ask just you to share a little bit of your knowledge and a little bit of your time with us today, to help us to understand some of the things that we need to be thinking about, or that mental health practitioners, professionals need to be thinking about as they're adding a coaching program to their practice. And so I just want to start with a fairly open question for you, and then we can just see where this goes. But I wanted to ask you, Bruce, what advice do you have for a mental health professional who wants to add a coaching program to their practice?
Well, I first uh, try very hard actually to make sure that the professional understands the difference between therapy and coaching. Um, the coaching assumes and enhances normal functioning, whereas therapy uh, assesses and treats pathology. And it's a critical distinction. There's not just a semantic difference. Often clients will tell me that they're interested in going into coaching thinking that it's just therapy under a different guise. It's not. It's a more active, task-oriented, directive approach, and one also that does not, as I say, treat pathology. Now, there is often an overlap, particularly among a group of people, clients who are called the worried well, as to whether they meet criteria, diagnostic criteria for a mental or emotional disorder or not. For mental health professionals, though, there is an ethical requirement that's imposed on them that may not be on somebody who is simply a certified life coach, and that is to not allow coaching to be used as a substitute for necessary mental health care. So for a mental health care professional who's interested in going into coaching, I'll first discuss with them the distinction that I mentioned, and then remind them of their ethical obligation not to allow their coaching to be used as a substitute, which means essentially that they're almost surreptitiously going to do a mental status exam on coaching clients, at least individual ones, to try to assess whether that person does have a mental or emotional disorder, and if so, to assure themselves that the person is in treatment elsewhere for that diagnosed illness before they accept that person as a client in a coaching program. Next, I tell them that they do want to distinguish their coaching practice from their mental health care practice. That generally, if there are two ways to do that. One is perhaps for mental health care professionals who want to try out coaching. They're not sure whether it's for them. They're not sure just how significant a part of their income and practice it's going to be. For them, they can pull the coaching practice under the umbrella of their mental health practice on a small scale, so long as they have appropriate disclaimers. A disclaimer is a kind of a fancy legal term, meaning that it's obligatory on a provider of service to disabuse persons who might avail themselves of that service of any reasonable expectation that the customer might have that's not in fact the case. In other words, people might assume that when they're going to a mental health professional for coaching, it doesn't really matter for what, that they're receiving a psychotherapeutic service. They have to be told that is not the case. A disclaimer has to have two aspects. One, you have to be clear in telling folks what you do, and secondly, you have to be clear in telling folks what you don't do. In other words, the disclaimer has to say, here's what I'm providing to you, coaching, and you describe the type of coaching that you provide, and then you have to have the more properly characterized disclaimer saying this is not a healthcare or mental health care service. It's not a substitute for necessary healthcare service. It's and that it's not eligible for insurance reimbursement, and that referrals will be provided upon request to necessary mental health care. Now, if my clients are going to go into coaching on a large scale basis, then I do suggest that they form a separate entity, usually a limited liability company, and get and advertise the coaching as separate from their psychology business. Oftentimes I'll be told, well, okay, I'll establish a separate LLC, but I still want to advertise that I'm a social worker or a psychologist when I'm advertising my coaching service, even under the aegis of this business entity. That's okay, because let me just give you a little further information. I represent a significant part of my practice is representing mental health care professionals before licensing boards when there are disciplinary charges against them. So I tell them that they must, in engaging in the coaching, differentiate it clearly from any kind of therapeutic process. And one of the ways is by forming the LLC. Another way is if they want to use their professional status to enhance the marketing of their coaching business, then what the licensing board has said when we've had to deal with charges of practicing without a license, generally, in close proximity to your telling folks that you are a social worker or a psychologist, you have to also say, but I'm not doing that in my coaching business. In other words, if you want to say, I am so-and-so, a licensed clinical social worker, or I am so-and-so, a psychologist, and I have this coaching business, when you say I am a psychologist or a social worker, you're supposed to say in close proximity to having said that, but this is not that. What I'm offering under this business is different, is coaching. And again, there's the disclaimer involved. Coaching seems to be greatly, very popular these days, both because a lot of folks want that kind they want that type of service. They want someone to help, someone who's on call, somebody who has the professional background and knowledge, and it is a way, I think, for professionals to enhance their marketing. Now, the LLC will, of course, get, at least if they're listening to my advice, get insurance for their LLC, coaching insurance. Sometimes I'm asked by mental health professionals, well, what makes me eligible for life coaching insurance? Errors and omissions, it's called, because it's not malpractice per se. Most insurers who insure coaches do consider someone who is licensed as a mental health professional to also be qualified, even overqualified actually, as a life coach. Either that or certification as a life coach is adequate to apply for and obtain the insurance. The last aspect that I often discuss with clients who are going into coaching is the use of synonyms, cognates. You know, they're used to talking about anxiety. They're used to talking about depression. They're used to talking about clinical terms. Because a significant portion of their clientele is going to be among the worried well, they can't avoid those types of descriptors entirely. So I tell them to come up with synonyms. In other words, you're not going to tell folks that you're helping them with anxiety. Anxiety is a symptom, and you don't want to, again, confuse the therapy with the coaching. So you'll talk about stress or worry or something that is not in the DSM or ICD as a symptom. You're not going to talk about depression, although you may talk about sadness and loneliness and feeling down. Those those are the topics that I generally hit when I'm talking to somebody about becoming a coach.
Wow. Okay. So I'm taking copious notes here on what you're saying, and this is great. My question about disclaimers is, do they need to be signature on paper, or can they be digital disclaimers? I accept, I accept, I accept, as you're signing up for a program.
Digital is fine. As a matter of fact, many states, including New York, where I practice, do require that electronic signatures be accepted in lieu of live signatures, wet signatures. So
Okay.
yeah, that's fine.
And the crossing state lines, if somebody wants to join your coaching program in California and you're a New York licensed mental health practitioner and you followed key terms and you followed all your other advice to the letter, does that then open the door to working interstate in a psychoeducational coaching program with somebody from another country or another state?
As far as I know, there are no jurisdictions that have coaching as a licensed activity. In other words, a license is not required to call oneself a life coach and to conduct life coaching. So yes, you can do it across state lines. Now, remember I said there were two ways to do it. One is under the umbrella of your professional of your professional entity or of yourself as a professional. The other is to form a separate business or commercial entity. We have had some problems where a mental health practitioner has not created a separate entity and has coached as a social worker or a psychologist in another state. They obtain a disclaimer, but sometimes when a couple on maybe three or four occasions, we have had to defend mental health professionals who don't have a separate LLC. So the distinction is not clear enough for the regulators in the other state. In other words, the allegation is you were practicing as a social worker or psychologist in the state, even though you have this disclaimer saying that what you're not practicing healthcare or mental health care. They say, wait a minute, you can't divorce yourself from being a psychologist or being a social worker that easily with a simple disclaimer. Now, we've always won those cases so long as we have the disclaimer. But it's safer to form a separate coaching entity, because then I don't think the regulators at the state boards, licensing boards, would be able to press charges that you were functioning as a psychologist or social worker. In the same way, I mean, a psychologist, a social worker, or a psychiatrist. We have several psychiatrist coaches. You can function. You can be a psychiatrist and also function as a I don't know, carpenter, a plumber, a jeweler, whatever you want to be. And there's no reason you can't also be a life coach. But for some reason, regulators feel that there should be a separate legal entity that does that, so that there's not confusion about whether you're practicing the profession or not.
That makes a lot of sense. What happens if you're running a program that's more psychoeducational? It's not, you're not providing the clinical intervention, of course, and there is somebody inside your program who you feel is having a crisis. Are there ethical considerations you have to apply with the mental health knowledge that you have when you can see somebody in your program who's going through a serious crisis and might need some other intervention? Is there something that you have to say to these people or do for these people in that situation?
If you are a licensed mental health professional, yes, you do. I believe that you are ethically required to inform them that you can't tell them they need mental health care, because then you are perforce having at least suggested that you've conducted an evaluation, which you're not supposed to do. That's professional practice. You are supposed to tell them, I think you need consult with a mental health practitioner about the possibility of the necessity of mental health care. And I also recommend in those situations that the mental health care practitioner tell their client, and for now we're going to take a hiatus in our coaching until I feel you can benefit from coaching, because right now I feel whatever they brought up, the panic attacks, the not being able to get out of bed, I think that's interfering with your ability to utilize the coaching. So I do want you to check with somebody before we reestablish a coaching relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there like coaching topics that would just be a red flag for a regulator? I mean, I know there are unlicensed non-mental health practitioner coaches who are throwing around terms like I'm an anxiety coach, I'm a trauma coach, things like this. I think this is a fairly obvious question for mental health practitioners, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there specific topics or guidance you can provide on specific topics for a coaching program that a licensed mental health practitioner should avoid?
Yes, and what you just mentioned is exactly one of them, Robin. Using clinical terms, trauma is no, I mean, PTSD is it's a diagnosable illness. A
Hmm.
trauma coach runs the risk of being accused of professional practice, either without a license or if they do have a license, with mischaracterizing something as coaching that is in fact therapy, for which they will be held liable as a therapist. In other words, a mental health professional starts doing therapy coaching, and for some reason there's a bad outcome, they're going to be, and there's a lawsuit against them or complaint to a licensing board, they're going to be told there's no such thing as trauma coaching. That's therapy. And if you're going to conduct therapy, you have to do a full-on assessment, a mental status exam, have a treatment plan. You're responsible for the person, for the treatment of the person's illness, or under what is an accepted, customary protocol. And you didn't do that. You thought you were coaching this person, but that didn't work. And for you as a mental health professional, you're liable for that. The other problems that we run into are well, I don't know if folks want to hear this, but I mentioned we do have a number of clients who were coaches, who were licensed therapists, but for whatever reason lost their license, and then they become coaches because they can. They do have the background. We have had state investigators go visit those folks, and they're tricky. The state investigator will go say to a social worker who's lost their license as a social worker and is now practicing as a coach, and somebody from the state will go visit them, and they'll ask, well, this is coaching, right? And the coach will say, yeah, that's what I offer. And the investigator will say, it's really no different from therapy, is it? And God help the poor. We've had clients who say, no, really, there's no difference. It's the same thing. I'm trained as a therapist. That's what I do. I use cognitive behavioral methods or whatever insights to inform the intervention. Then you get the letter saying that you're practicing without a license. That's which is scary, criminal. Yeah.
Yeah, understood. Understood. Yeah, it has to be a clear distinction. I totally get that. I hadn't thought of that. So this is great. Do you have any other advice that I haven't touched on that you would believe is pertinent and important for people who are considering to launch?
Other than marketing is key. I mean, we do have some coaching clients, actually a number, who will ask me to scour their websites when they want to market their coaching practice to ensure that it's not they don't cross the line anywhere in their descriptors. Now, I don't know if that's something you do, Robin. I bet if you do it as well as I do, and not as expensively as I do. So that is something that I do recommend, because it is easy enough, given that they're bathed in clinical terminology, for them to advertise without crossing that line.
Excellent. And so you can help with website reviews and marketing reviews, but how else can you help?
I form I'm an attorney, so I form LLCs for them. In New York State. That's you have to publish notice of an LLC. I give them the disclaimers that are suitable for them, or the coaching contracts that are suitable for them. And we set them up from a legal perspective. If as I said, legal fees tend to be expensive, so if they can avail themselves of those same resources elsewhere, it might be more cost effective.
Yeah, getting sued is also very expensive.
Yes.
Getting up in court, losing your license is also extremely expensive. So, it seems to me like an investment that's well worth it. And I liked how you also drew, there's the way to sort of dip your toe in the water a bit. And then there's, okay, I can see there's something here I want to commit to. And at that point of commitment, then I think this is actually vital for for anybody who's getting into this business and really wants to know that they're covered and really wants to know that they're doing it the right way.
Yes.
You know? Absolutely. Because, there's a ton of people helping anybody, not just I focus on mental health providers only because that's what I feel. But there's a ton of people helping anybody to set up a coaching business, and the advice that they're giving in terms of marketing doesn't contain any of this. I think this is a very important conversation, and it's something that any mental health provider has to take very seriously. How can people get in touch with you when they need you?
Oh, they can find me online, brucehillowe.com.
Okay.
Or just Google my name. You'll find me. There's one other issue that you brought up that I just want to touch on, and that has to do with you talked about online group coaching. With online group coaching, you have the additional issue that need be dealt with in your written information or your disclaimers, and that has to do with confidentiality and privacy. If you're going to tape and allow others access, you need to get permission from folks. If you're operating under your professional license, then arguably the professional obligation to maintain confidentiality extends even to the coaching practice. And even if you're operating simply as an LLC, and it's easier to distinguish yourself from practicing a profession as a coach, you do have to deal with privacy concerns. You can't just use other folks' likenesses and input for your commercial purposes without potentially ending up being accused of violating their privacy rights.
Okay,
you need those waivers as well.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for joining us today. And it's brucehillowe.com, is that right?
It is.
All right, I'm going to put that in the notes beside this post as well and beside the blog post. And should anybody ever need any help with establishing themselves or want to check anything with Bruce, then just his information's a click away. Thanks very much for joining.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I'm a New York lawyer.
Yeah.
Which means that my practice, sort of like a mental health care professional, is limited to New York State. So for those of your clients who are located in other states, they would need to find a mental health care or other attorney who's versed in coaching practice other than myself. I would my practice is limited to New York State.
Understood.
Okay.
Thanks so much, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you and speak to you, Robin. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.